Bonjour tout le monde. Biere Mfon Pamum. Mesdames et messieurs, la séance, la séance d'aujourd'hui, donc du vendredi 20 janvier, va être dans la continuité de ce que nous avons suivi donc hier. En effet, nous avons assisté à de brillantes communications sur les langues africaines anciennes et nouvelles, l'écriture hiéroglyphique, le nko, la kaoukou, le créole, etc. Et les exposés nous ont expliqué leur évolution, leur fonctionnement, leur revitalisation, le cas de la mazir par exemple donc au Maroc, et leur rôle pour écrire une histoire, comme ça a été dit hier, une histoire décomplexée de notre continent, et une attention particulière, vous l'avez remarqué hier, a été accordée aux relations entre l'image et le texte. Nous y reviendrons donc tout à l'heure. Et évidemment, c'était l'occasion de constater que l'écriture se libère et retrouve son aspect originel, pictural et gestuel. Voilà, nous continuons donc ce matin sur cette lancée en écoutant 4 interventions qui vont aborder, qui vont plutôt revenir sur l'inventivité linguistique, l'écriture Bamu, inventée par le roi Joya, l'oralité et l'invention des écritures, le narratif africain relié donc aux médias, et enfin on reviendra à l'esthétique, l'hiéroglyphe comme moteur esthétique. Voilà. Alors le premier intervenant est le professeur de Conrad Tucherer. I hope I've... Perfect. All right. Professor Conrad Tucherer is a Fulbright visiting professor at the Institute of Languages and Cultural Studies in Njala, University, Sierra Leone. He is also associate professor of history, St. John's University in United States of America, and co-director of Bamu Scripts and Archives projects at the Royal Palace of Bamu Kings. Conrad Tucherer is a specialist in African history and languages. He co-edited Autobiography of an African Princess and co-produced the documentary film Ghosts of Amistad. I give you the floor, Professor Conrad Tucherer.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the Perpetual Secretary, Professor Mbode, Professor Esauri, members of the Academy, panelists, ladies and gentlemen, and if I can move this. And I would like to give a special thank you to the King, Mbiri Fon Pamum, Mohammed Nabil Morifum, Bombo and Joya, Sultan of Bamu. On the first day that we were here, the king, in speaking from this very podium, made a distinction which very few scholars are able to make, but something that he knew very well, which is that the Bamu have two inventions credited to his great-grandfather, King Joya, which were an original script called Akauku in its last variant, but also an invented spoken language. And many people do not appreciate that there are these two things that the Bamu contributed to the majesty of languages of the world. An original alphabet, but also an original artificial language. And that language is called Shumum. And it is the only known artificial spoken language which is spoken at a popular level on the continent of Africa. The only one. There are radio programs in this artificial language. And so this is not the conventional Bamu language that people speak, which is in Bamu is called Shupamum. This is called Shumum. So the tradition of Bamu writing incorporates not only the conventional language that the Bamu speak, but also an artificial language. And they have books that are over 1,000 pages in this artificial spoken language. So there is a great deal of linguistic complexity among the Bamu people. The king, of course, reads and writes Akauku. He speaks Shupamum. He speaks Shumum. One of the younger generation who speaks Shumum, English and French, and so he has a lot of insight into what I'm talking about today. This slide is of the Bamu Palace in Fumban. And this next slide is of a place called Mbapit. It's a mountain. When people are coming into Fumban, you see this mountain. And of course, this is represented on the map. If you see, okay, my pointer's not working, but if you see Fumban and Bamu, of course, this is an outsider's map. But these things are plotted on a Bamu map that dates to the second decade of the 20th century. This map is entirely in Bamu. In the center of the map is the Bamu Palace. And at the bottom right of the map is Mount Bapid. And so the Bamu were creating their own maps. And in fact, the Bamu started to write based on traditional ideographs and pictographs prior to the arrival of outsiders in the Bamu kingdom. Like we saw yesterday in the talk on Brule Bruabre from Ivory Coast, the Bamu had their own traditional pictographs that they used to create their original alphabet. You see the symbols on some of these dancers at the Bamu Palace. This is a little dark, so it's difficult to see. If you see on the woman's left arm, there's a tattoo of what looks to be a lizard. And this is one of the symbols from the first alphabet called Leiwa that was created by King Joya. And you can see, if you look on the left-hand side, you can see the symbol of the lizard or chameleon, and what that means in the early pictographic writing was child of the king or princess. And of course, as we saw yesterday, the Bamu script went through 6 stages until it reached its final stage of a kauku. This is actually a decree written by King Joya himself, and at the bottom is an early signature of King Joya. These are some examples of the Bamu script. The final variant of the Bamu script. These examples come from the archives in Fumban, which, as Nji Nchare, who spoke yesterday, said, the archives has over 7,500 manuscripts. These are manuscripts that we worked with to digitize. We've digitized all of the manuscripts in the palace archives. Probably outside of the Bamu language, Shupamum and Shumum, the script that we see in the archives the most, and the language that we see the most, is Arabic in Fumban. And you can see at the top of this, this is a writing that commemorates the birthday of Muhammad, and it includes Arabic. It also includes at the top left a cipher in the Bamu script, which is commonly used, which is, it looks like J77, but that is the Bamu way of writing God, Nyinyi. We also find in the archives magic squares, different amulets for healing, for fortune telling, and often you'll see on the left-hand side is the Bamu script sort of discussion of what that magic square is. Here, a letter from King Joya, and you can see on the bottom right is the official stamp of the Bamu kingdom. And here it is blown up. It is a double-headed snake. This is one of the primary symbols of the Bamu people. And the writing that you see inside the symbol is the name King Joya. In fact, the Bamu and the official correspondence in the first part of the 20th century included, even on the envelopes, wax stamps that had the Bamu script, such as this. And many of the books on, there are pharmacopoeias, there are books on Bamu history. Some of these books are over 1,000 pages long, and they all have their own bags that those sacred books are kept in, and the book bags themselves are works of art. This is one of the book bags from the Bamu archives. And inkwells for writing with the Bamu script on the inkwell. There are farming calendars that are written in a cyclical way. Architectural designs with explanations in the Bamu script. And this is a special book, and in fact, if Miriam is here, she had a printout for me. Is Miriam here? Okay, Miriam's not here. This is from what is called the Book of Love. It was written by King Joya in the year 1917. The book has about 55 pages, and this particular chapter is very beautiful. King Joya is writing to his notables in the Bamu Palace, and he's telling them that when they're out in public, they should feel free to use their big titles, and their wives should call them by their big titles. The wives should give their husbands, these are important notables, all the respect that they deserve in public. But, King Joya said, when they're at home, the woman should never call a man by his big titles. She should just treat him as a friend or a brother. And a man that allows that from the woman will refuse him nothing. And that is his advice to his notables. It's quite beautiful and poetic. This is a document that we recently acquired for the palace. It's a map of the planets that was written in the early part of the 20th century. Unfortunately, apart from the little rips, there was oil that was all over the manuscript. So it's not that the picture is not clear, it's that the document had oil on it. I mention this because what we see, a lot of the historical documents, because of the climate, because of human handling, they're easily destroyed. These are some important books that we acquired for the palace. You can see that they're disintegrating. I wish that you could see this more clearly. This is an example of the Bamu script written on banana leaves. Some of the earliest examples of the Bamu script are actually written on banana leaves. So these things need to be preserved. Apart from the origin of alphabets, this symposium has been about caring for cultural patrimony, digitizing things, etc. So we brought these into the palace and we have taken care of them. In 2006, under the late Sultan, Sultan Ibrahim Bombo and Joya, the father of the king, we started a program called Bamu Scripts and Archives Project. Here is the late king, and if you see there is a young man who's wearing a red shirt, that was the Sultan who sits here in this room today as a young boy who was part of our project. Collecting documents around the kingdom, old photographs and other documents, copying texts, studying texts. This is a map of the Bamu kingdom, photographing, digitizing, creating an archival space. We have a completely modernized archival space with all the documents being preserved in acid-free boxes. The room humidity and temperature is all monitored in Fumban. We also do grave rubbings because these tombs get weathered. And we teach the script. This was a teacher who was not teaching in an official capacity in schools, this particular teacher. But King Joya, this of course is King Joya, the inventor of the alphabet and the great-grandfather of the current king. You'll remember from yesterday that in the first decade of the 20th century, there were schools that were formed. This was the first Bamu school for teaching the script. The son of King Joya, the inventor, Sultan Seydu Jimolu, he also promoted the learning of the script. And again, this photograph looks like it's difficult to see. The Sultan is at the top of the photograph, and these are students learning the Bamu script. And this goes to the late Sultan, the Sultan Ibrahim Bombo Joya, the father of the current king. This was teaching of the Bamu script during his reign as king. One of the students was the king. This is a photograph of the king as a young boy learning the Bamu script, which he writes fluently today. Young people working with this script. Another thing we did, we created signage around the Bamu kingdom. This sign reads Fumban, so when you come into Fumban, you see the Bamu script. People will wonder, what is that? It's like seeing Neo Tefina here. You know, people see it everywhere. It helps to promote the script, the culture, and so forth. In the middle is the last variant of the Bamu script that many of you learned yesterday. And this has been turned into a computer font. This is available on all computers. It's a free font, and we use it in Fumban. It's available on all the internet cafes. You can find it on the internet. This was a grassroots initiative. These characters were created in the palace, working with well-respected fontographers internationally. But this was a Bamu initiative. And lastly, this is a new piece of writing that we had never seen previously. This was written by King Joya. It was recently discovered in a German archives. This is the earliest evidence of the Bamu script that is known. It's earlier than anything that we have in the palace. So it's quite exciting to have. These characters are the forerunners of the other characters that we have from a later period. So this really gives us an opportunity to see what the early vision for this alphabet, for this syllabary, really looked like. And so we've started to work with it already and to translate it completely. And it's actually a letter written by King Joya himself to a German military officer who was visiting Fumban in 1904. So again, the script dates to about 1896. This is dated to 1904. Why don't we have things in Fumban that are earlier? Well, partly it's because documents are perishable because of the environment, but also there have been a number of fires that actually burned the palace from the beginning of the 20th century. So many of the documents were lost. For purposes of time, I actually was going to sort of read a translation of this, but there are several characters that we've never seen before, and we've had to figure them out, just like the early scholars of Egyptian, of hieroglyphs, by looking at the context of what is being written. And what we see, and what's exciting about Bamu in particular, is that the system early on was pictographic, but had certain phonetic or linguistic syllabic attributes. So one of the takeaways when you leave this lecture hall, what is so important about Bamu? What is important is that it gives us an example of the full evolution of a writing system within a brief period of time. So it offers a glimpse of what happened when hieroglyphs were created 5,000 years ago. We know about the rebus principle. We can imagine how hieroglyphs were created. With Bamu, we see a full evolution of a writing system from pictographic all the way through to fully phonetic. And there really is no other example on record of a system of writing where you can see that full transition. And to put it in context of those writing systems here that have been discussed, Egyptian, again, dating to about 3,500 BC to about, that's 5,000 years ago. We can only imagine what the process of evolution was for Egyptian. For tefina, just like its counterpart, the Ethiopian syllabary, dating to about the year 0. And we've had Nko from Guinea and from West Africa, and Bete from Ivory Coast. Those scripts developed after World War II. This is pretty special. Developed before the Bamu, in fact, had interacted directly with outsiders. When outsiders arrived in the Bamu kingdom, the Bamu were already writing about those outsiders. So it's pretty special. And I think that just about does it. Only maybe to mention again that in the archives, maybe about 80% of the books transcribe Shupamum, which is the conventional language spoken by the Bamu. Another 20% is Shumum, which is the invented language, the invented spoken language of the Bamu. And so when we're thinking about an invented spoken language, it's like Esperanto or Volapük, or if you watch Star Trek, it's the Worfian language, or if you read J.R. Tolkien's books, they are the artificial created languages. So it's quite exceptional. So I think with that, I will leave the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Konrad Tucherer, for this presentation. We learned a lot about the Bamu script created by the King Sultan Ibrahim Joya, and we learned a lot also about the use of we did and we do of this language. The archives you showed are very important and very helpful to understand the Bamu script. Thank you very much indeed. Et nous passons sans transition, j'allais dire, à l'exposé suivant, qui sera donc donné par le professeur Vicky Sylvester de l'université d'Abuja au Nigeria, et qui va donc porter sur le narratif relié par donc les médias. C'est une question donc importante. Très rapidement alors Dr. Vic Sylvester, we said that in French because it's written in French, your notice biography. You don't mind? No, I don't. No, right. Dr. Vic Sylvester, donc, a travaillé comme journaliste et rédactrice en chef et a enseigné pendant plusieurs années, donc aussi bien à l'école secondaire qu'à l'université. Alors, ces expériences l'ont exposé à des questions de genre devenu à la fois un sujet d'étude, d'enseignement, de créativité et de leadership. À l'université d'Abuja, elle enseigne en premier cycle, le troisième cycle, sur l'anglais, l'écriture créative, la littérature victorienne, etc. Il a publié plusieurs ouvrages, j'en cite quelques-uns. Une histoire littéraire des écrivains nigérianes, Zuma Rock et autres poèmes, les droits des femmes sont des droits humains. Ça, nous sommes tout à fait d'accord avec vous. Et puis un roman historique de Cabbels en 2018, un recueil de nouvelles, A Plague of Many Colors. Bon, Professor Vicky Sylvester, I give you the floor and invite you to give your presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Good morning. I am very, very happy to be here. I want to thank the chair. I want to thank Monsieur Bode for inviting me here. I'm especially happy to have seen the king, and I was wondering the historical implications, and I'm so happy that this makes my work very relevant. I'm actually working on a research on collecting narratives and storing them on digital media, since sometimes the paperwork is destroyed. And many new stories are coming. Old stories, once in a while, you see them on social media. And it's not all the time. And if you let them go, you may not see them. So we need to collect them and preserve them on digital media in different ways. It could be animations. You know, in Africa, almost every community has the tortoise tales. They are animals. The tortoise always think it's a very smart animal, but there are others smarter than the tortoise. And so we think that this colloquium is a good way of bringing academics together and coming up with these beautiful ideas. I'm especially happy with Conrad's presentation, because to a large extent, it's what I'm talking about in my paper. I'm a literary historian, and I see what he has done by collecting these scripts. What I'm looking at is narratives play an important role in ensuring that people think and they say and name things correctly, the way the language uses them. We find that ethnic languages are unique in stating their differences, very unique. So writers help in reaching a wider audience using the tools of digital media. Now, I want us to say the role of traditional African narratives. What's the role of traditional African narratives in the present age? they do a lot of things. I'll just give one example, although I have many in my paper. Take songs, for instance. When Conrad was presenting his paper, there are people there dancing. You can see poetry in the legs and in the body, and the drawings representing the people. Now, at times, politicians, for instance, will not perform their duties, and the oral poets in the area will coin a song. Recently, a politician lost election in Nigeria because a song, he was a commissioner for land, and he wanted to contest for Senate. And people coined a song saying, "Don't vote for the seller of lands." He became a seller of lands, not a commissioner for lands. And so don't vote for the seller of lands who will take your money and buy pig meat. Now, there is a lot of insults in that song, but people began to sing it, and eventually he lost the elections. Why am I not getting this? Okay. All right. So, traditional narratives are a constant on social media today. The grandmother tales. We all know the grandmother. I'm now a grandmother as well, and I'm telling my little ones as stories. These stories capture a lot of things to do with honesty, to do with respect, and the most important thing is that the text should capture the narrative voice, should capture the wise sayings and imageries, and not the alternatives, because the alternatives they are seen on social media have their own different standards and values. And people were getting worried that nobody is bothered about proverbs, and proverbs were getting in short supply. In Nigeria, proverbs are very important. If you don't know proverbs, they call you a fool, because when I am talking something important, instead of explaining what it is, I will simply give you a proverb. So all these means of digital media show that the times are changing, and we should capture those stories the way they are said in their own languages, so they do not lose the beauty. So these traditional narratives projected on WhatsApp and Facebook and all others, they exemplify good behavior, hard work, humility. They carry jokes to praise, to chastise, or to ridicule. And a lot focus on culture, kingship, courtship, respect, honesty. All these, we don't need to lose them. We must collect them and put them on digital media so that the children will have access. My focus is especially the children and the young people. They should not lose this. So, Those are the grandmother tales I was talking about earlier. These narratives carry a lot of history, and we can't afford to lose that history. Now, what some people have asked is, Africa has many languages, and it will be difficult for many reasons to expect everyone to write books in these languages. However, the culture emanating from speakers of these languages have a lot to offer, as their narratives capture both history and literary trends. Look at the history of Zulu Shaka. Look at Amos Tutuola's Palm Wine Drinkard. Look at Ngugi wa Thiong'o's stories. Look at Sembene Usman's stories. In Senegal, look at Ferdinand Oyono. Those stories must not be lost. The language, sometimes there is complaint about how it is told in English. In English, Amos Tutuola's book has given rise to the study of Nigerian English in universities right now. But initially, everybody said, oh, fantasy, poorly written, not the received pronunciation of English. But today, he's making a big comeback, and researchers are doing a lot on his work. Of course, we talk about translation. Sometimes we lose the nuanced terms that properly describe characters and environment. So we find many of our popular writers. I also have a historical novel, and critics look at them. Palm Wine Drinkard, now the research is that it is science fiction. But traditionally, Western critics didn't see it as science fiction. They saw it as fantasy. But a lot of critics now and researchers have discovered more in the Palm Wine Drinkard. Now, why are researchers going into this? Our elders will say, when the weather is cold, no woman is ugly. So the weather is now cold for researchers, and they are finding things they had put behind. Now I think narratives and digital media are a site for thinking. When you look at your WhatsApp and Facebook stories, they come in different lengths. As I had mentioned earlier, jokes and other things. And they cut across various thematic concerns, including religion, aging, youth, politics, and governance, education, and corruption. In this quest, language mirrors the actions and delivery, helps the listener capture the movement of the story. Thus, language in the Palm Wine Drinkard is used in ways that are universally crucial to science fiction. We must listen to the stories in the languages in which they are told, because there are a lot of things you miss with translation. So the younger generation should grow up and know the way you speak the language. Know the way the words, what do the words mean in the language before you attempt to translate into English or French or Arabic or any other language. So, many of the books that were seen as the best science fiction in the past, if you look at many African stories, they will make beautiful science fiction with animations, beautiful science fiction, because when we talk of, Africans talk of witches, a witch is not always a bad thing. A witch will fly on her broom or his broom and go to rescue somebody. So these are things we need to look closely at the stories in order to fill the gaps. So among its many forms, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, WhatsApp has become a preferred media platform. So we look at, what I have done is to look closely at the stories in WhatsApp and Facebook, and I have found many stories, some which I heard as a child and had forgotten about them. So I think in order not to lose those stories and the new ones, recently during the World Football game, we have a lot of stories about Morocco because everybody was supporting Morocco at home. I think because that was the only African team that was moving. And everybody wanted Morocco to win. And the night Morocco lost, they say, oh, our wife has gone to sleep. They had many proverbs and many stories to tell about football, about the players from Morocco here. You find everybody had a fan and a story. So if you collect those stories and you see them tomorrow, you wouldn't believe that this happened within a very short time during the game. So every now and again, members of WhatsApp groups post traditional narratives and new narratives that most members have forgotten to support new political or cultural commentary. Now, this is one of the stories. I will just summarize it briefly. It's, when you have time, you read it. It is called, it's one of those stories, current stories that are being told. It's about a neighbor whose daughter got sick, and he took the daughter to a traditional medicine man who healed the daughter with local herbs. But the wife went to a prophet, and the prophet did what? The prophet did nothing. But at the end, when the husband bought a goat to give the medicine man for healing his daughter, before he returned from work, the wife took the goat and gave it to the prophet. And the man is saying in this story, using Nigerian English, that today we will die in this house. That is, I'm going to die if you don't return that goat to take it to the medicine man who healed my daughter. Now, this story is directed at religious fraudsters. It's mocking religious fraudsters who believe, and other people who believe in fake prophets. So putting these stories in voice, pictures, on digital media will help reduce the patronage of fake healing. It will give also credence to traditional medicine. So, young writers should be encouraged to listen to these stories and to write them, to learn to write them in their languages. That is my key focus, the language in which these stories are told. Literary agents should also help to promote books on digitally mediated interaction as well as print and broadcast media. we should write across genres, mixing tradition and modern forms of storytelling. By so doing, the bridges we hold and take the youth across to sustain traditional styles of reading and writing. Now, how do we preserve traditional narratives? Things are very easy now. We have computers, we have tablets, we have smartphones, and all are developed facilities for storage and presentation of narratives in whichever language is chosen for the relevant age. We hear that the narratives in the last presentation are already put on digital media. So I'm very happy. I will take my research to where I can learn from this situation. So this will render language not just visible, especially in children's animations, but also knowledge in the information passed to the reader. We know that narratives foster our ability to retell individual and communal stories and history. We should constantly retell historical origins. We was talking of symbols. I saw somebody wearing a dress that I recognized as coming from a place in Benue State in Nigeria that I'm very familiar with. And I asked him, "Are you from Benue State?" And he said, "No, I got this from Burkina Faso." So you see the relationships in African cultures and dress. Now the one in Benue is a symbol. The black and white is a symbol. It says the people were being pursued and they ran across a river and they saw something like a bridge in black and white and they ran across. And as soon as they crossed, the enemies came after them and that bridge went down. It was a snake that served as a bridge. And so the traditional colors, the woven cloth that the people wear carries that color, black and white. There are other colors, and each color of a dress represents something. Purple is also there, and it represents celebrations. And I'm wearing purple today. Is a celebration for me. It's the end of our
on va arrêter quelques instants là, donc la séance.